Picking up all a bunch of little nicks and scratches. My skin is getting like my dad's used to get. You know, as soon as it just gets a hard rub, it'll get these little red spots and blood blisters.
Your mic's on. I don't say anything you don't want everybody to hear. Sorry. What's that for loud?
Good afternoon, everyone. We are here for our second lesson of this series of lessons, Does God Exist?, presented by John Clayton. Last week we looked at the introduction, and today we're going to talk about the beginning of the cosmos, or as John is, and then we have the list of questions that have been posted, and then Chris and I will just discuss some of the things that he has to say today. If you have any questions or comments that you would like to send in, go ahead and do that either now or during the presentation or during the discussion afterwards. So if nothing else, we'll go ahead with the beginning of the cosmos.
Welcome to program number 2 of Does God Exist video series. I hope you looked at number 1, because number 1 will give you some orientation about what we're doing here, what my background is, what we're attempting to show, and how we're attempting to show it. In this program, we want to actually start talking about evidence. But I actually start looking at fundamental questions related to how we can in fact demonstrate there is a God, something out there. Let me emphasize again, we're not using the Bible. We may occasionally make a reference to a biblical quote because it's something people are familiar with. Like in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Most people have heard that. But we're not proving anything from Scripture. And we tried to emphasize in the first presentation why that is. I don't think you can use the Bible as a way of demonstrating there's a God, because if there is no God, then the Bible is just a bunch of myths, and we talked about that. There's also an important point involved here of a philosophical nature. In reality, I'm making one philosophical assumption in these presentations. It's an assumption that I think is reasonable. But if you cannot accept this assumption, then I'm not so sure we can continue to have any dialogue. The assumption is simple. I want you to be willing to admit that you exist. That you exist. That there is reality. Now, if you're watching this video program and you don't believe you exist, you have bigger problems than I want to deal with. And that's a philosophical reality issue. We're assuming reality here. We're talking about things that are fundamentally scientific. That means, remember our definition from the first program, they can be verified experimentally, they can be falsified, they can be observed, they can be experimentally dealt with in some way or another. We're dealing with reality. You exist. Now, if you admit that you exist, the first major question that we want to talk about is, did that existence have a beginning? In the previous program, I talked about Stephen Hawking and his suggestion that you could avoid the question of God's creation by assuming that something can come from nothing without really defining what you mean by nothing. And we talked about the question of dimensions. I mean, in bosonic theory, there are 26 spatial dimensions. In string theory, there's 11 spatial dimensions. I'm talking about X, Y, Z, and time. The beginning. If we come to a discussion of our own existence, I suggest to you that's the framework we have to deal with. Quantum mechanics deals with the very, very small. What is it that makes up electric charge? What is it that makes up quarks? What is it that allows us to have measurements and experimentation on the structure of the fundamental building blocks, protons, electrons, neutrinos, and so forth? Our discussion deals with us, the physical world in which we live. The question of whether there was a beginning, not the beginning of whatever might have been responsible for the process of producing time and space and so forth, but the beginning of the universe as we can observe it, as we can experiment with it, as we can logically examine it. Was there a beginning? Or was there no beginning? Now here's a statement, and it actually came originally back some 50 years ago from a humanist organization that states one view. I would suggest it is a very safe atheist view. The universe is eternal, self-existing, and not created. Okay, eternal. That means that there was no beginning. In one sense or another, everything that we are made of, all of space, all of time, all of matter energy, has always been. It just gets recycled in some way or another, that it had never had a start. Self-existing means that there was no cause. Now, the reason I say that this is a very safe atheist position is because if you assume the universe is eternal, then you don't have to deal with the question of the beginning. If you assume there was no beginning, or if you accept the proposition that there was no beginning, then you don't have to deal with cause. The problem with dealing with cause is that if you admit there was a cause, you have to explain what that cause was. What was the causer? Now, in reality, string theory and brain theory and some of these concepts that we hear kicked around in the new science attempt to answer that question on some kind of a mechanical naturalistic basis. But the simpler way philosophically to avoid the issue is to simply deny that there was a beginning. Now, there is another position which is true of many religious structures. I will give you the quote you've heard the most often, and that is a quote from the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And you'll notice that in this chart, we have the 5 words that make up the Genesis account. Reshith, Elohim, Bara, Shakim, Eret. And we have how they would have been understood by the people of the time. And on the right-hand side, we have the number of times that that word is used in the Bible. Now, once again, I use the Bible here not to prove anything, but to simply demonstrate a juxtaposition. Reshith literally means something for which there was nothing before. Reshith Elohim. Elohim indicates a cause. Now, if you were to read other religious manuscripts, you might get a different view. Carl Sagan, in his Cosmos program, went back to Hindu manuscripts talking about recycling or reincarnation. And that was interesting. At the time in which he wrote that, there was some scientific support for that idea. But our question here is, what is the scientific evidence as we understand it today? Was there a beginning or was there no beginning? Now let's start out here by just taking a quick tour of the cosmos and look at some of the things we know so that we're all on the same page. Now what I'm going to do here is really copied from Carl Sagan's program Cosmos. And if you remember that program, which has been around for a long time, wonderful program, almost all of us saw it and enjoyed it. He did a thing in which he took us into outer space. And in the spaceship of your imagination, he came towards the Earth and explained to us what we have learned about the universe in which we live. And after he had laid that down, he then laid his personal philosophical ideology on us, which in that case was secular humanism. Now I want to do the same thing, except I'm going to do it the other direction, just to give us some foundation to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. There was a Burgess publication which was titled Powers of 10. It was actually a book in which each picture was 10 times further away than the previous picture. So I'm sort of copying that idea to try and give you an idea of space, and size, and distances involved. So we start on the back of our hand in Grant Park in Chicago. We backed up 10 times further away and we get this. 10 times further away, we get this. 10 times further away, 10 times further away, 10 times further away, 10 times further away, 10 times further away. And you know, very quickly, we get to a position that nobody watching this series probably has had an opportunity to see. Looking at the Earth from outer space, the Earth is a very different place. A beautiful blue oasis in the blackness of outer space. Something very beautiful. Something very fragile. Something worth taking care of. But as we continue to back away from the Earth, we become aware there are other things out there. Some of those things look like us. Mars, for example, as you can see in this picture, looks very much like us. It has a polar cap, just like we do, except it's mostly dry ice. It has volcanoes, very much like those upon the Earth, except one of the volcanoes, the one you see in the picture here, is actually the largest volcano in the solar system, we think. That may be changed, but it's many times taller than Mount Everest. But it's still a volcano. It still has calderas, it still has lava flows, it still has collapsed lava tubes. It still has batholithic uplifts, as you see in this picture. There are still storms moving across the surface. This is a dust devil moving across the surface of Mars. So there's weather. There are canyons on Mars. This is called Valles Marineris. I'm sure you've seen pictures of this huge canyon. As a matter of fact, that little box in the picture is the Grand Canyon of the Colorados on the scale of the Martian Grand Canyon. But in recent years, we've seen that canyon change. We've seen what appear to be water-carved channels. We've seen layers in the rock. We have seen a variety of features on the surface. And this thing is huge. I mean, superimposed on the United States, it was stretched from Los Angeles to New York, as you see in this picture. And in the craters, we see evidence of water, even on occasionally some ice, water ice or CO2 ice in the bottom of some of the craters. And one of the questions that comes up in a discussion like this as well, is there life on Mars? Does that have an issue for us? Does it affect our discussion? You know, I think some people get the idea that if life is found in outer space, it somehow compromises the question of God's existence. The Bible doesn't say this is the only place where God has seen fit to create life, and other religious books certainly don't preclude that possibility. The issue is not whether there is life in space. As a matter of fact, here's an interesting thing. They have found blueberries on Mars. No, wait a minute. They're not the blueberries you eat. This is a mineral formation that on the Earth is caused by bacteria. And it seems very likely there is bacteria on Mars. Let's understand that the question of life in space is not an issue. Later in this series, we'll talk about UFOs. We'll talk about some of the things that have to do with the paranormal. But the point we want to make right now is that this is not an issue related to the existence of God. People seem to get sidetracked on irrelevant tangents, and life in space is not an issue. As we continue to move out, we see a different kind of planet in the planet Jupiter. This picture shows the Earth superimposed on the surface of Jupiter. You get some idea of the incredible size of this planet. This Jovian planet, like Saturn, is a very different kind of place. Do you know that if you could put Saturn in your bathtub, it would float? Of course, you need one whale of a big bathtub, but the point is, it's a very different kind of world. As we continue to move on out of the solar system, past Uranus with its odd rings tilted to an angle of the ecliptic, past Neptune with lightning bolts, you see that spot on the right-hand side, the size of the state of Texas, and wind velocities of up to 1,400 miles an hour. And then we go past the old last planet. I say the old last planet because we now know there are other planets out there. And Pluto has been declassified as a planet. But look at the difference in the pictures. The picture on the left is the best Earth-based picture ever taken of Pluto and one of its moons, Charon. The box on the right shows a more recent picture of Pluto and Charon through one of the space telescopes through improved optics, and that picture now is grossly inferior to some of the newer pictures that have been taken of this particular area. But as we continue out of the solar system and the solar system fades into the background, something else becomes obvious. We are in a different type of system. And the picture that you see now shows something called a galaxy. Our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. It is one of many galaxies. You're looking at 100 billion stars. Let me give you an idea of how big a number that is. It has been less than 2 billion minutes since the beginning of our calendar, our Gregorian calendar. Less than 2 billion minutes, and there's 100 billion stars in our little galaxy called the Milky Way. You're about a third of the way out in this rotating pinwheel of stars. And as you look at these pictures, you can see the radical nature of our position and the radical size. This particular picture is a 5th grade science book, and that gives you some idea how early kids run into this type of discussion, showing a diagram of our Milky Way galaxy. And you'll notice on that it has a number given of 100,000 light years. 100,000 light years. That's how far light would go in 100,000 years. Has 588 quadrillion miles. Size is just astounding. But as we continue to move out away from the Milky Way galaxy, something else becomes obvious. There are other galaxies. This is a picture of the Andromeda Galaxy, our nearest neighbor. And as we move into it, what's interesting to realize is that it's very much like our own galaxy. It's another 100 billion stars rotating around a core. Let me give you an idea how far away that thing is. Let's suppose we send a message to a friend of yours living in that galaxy, the closest major galaxy to the Earth. A radio wave is the fastest thing we know of. A radio wave goes so fast it could orbit the Earth 8 2/10 times in 1 second. We send a radio message to a friend of yours living in that galaxy. They send an answer back to you. The instant they get your message, you'd only have to wait 4 million years to get an answer. The closest galaxy, closest major galaxy to us, is 2 million light years away. That means it takes 2 million years to get there, 2 million years to get back, traveling at the speed of light. Now, I hope your mind is stretching a little bit here, because look at this next picture. This is a very old picture. It was taken in the 1930s. And there are no stars in this picture. Every spot of light in that picture is another galaxy. Every spot of light contains 100 billion stars, give or take a few hundred million. Every spot of light is 100,000 light years, 588 quadrillion miles in diameter, plus or minus. You know, we thought that was pretty remarkable when that picture was taken. And then in the early 2000s, they had an experiment with the Hubble telescope in which they turned the Hubble telescope out into a part of space they thought was completely empty. Didn't see anything there. Not in our optical telescopes, not in our radio telescopes. They opened up the lens on the camera. They provided the longest exposure they could, expecting to get a totally black picture. Here is what they got. Ladies and gentlemen, those aren't stars, those are galaxies. Whatever your concept of the cosmos is, and if you believe in God, whatever your concept of God is, it just went up by 100 billion. Puts a whole new meaning to Carl Sagan's old phrase, billions of billions of billions. The size of the cosmos, it's absolutely incredible. And any discussion we have about God has to include that, positively or negatively. But there's another point here which comes to the answer of our discussion about whether there was a beginning or not. This is a drawing of galaxies and their motions. Everything is moving outward. Everything is moving away from a central point. If you had 3 galaxies located at positions A, B, and C, and if they were located in that position, you see them today, they'll be in that position tomorrow. They'll be in that position the day after tomorrow. The universe is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, what's one interpretation you can make of this? Well, here's a picture showing one of the interpretations. This is from a textbook showing the Big Bang. The Big Bang. One of the interesting points about the Big Bang is that people have reacted without understanding what the Big Bang is about. Interestingly enough, the word Big Bang, or the phrase Big Bang, was given by Fred Hoyle as sort of a joke, sort of as a criticism of the expanding universe idea and what interpretation might be made of it. But the Big Bang is just a statement of empirical evidence. Let me tell you a little personal story for those of you who are concerned about the Big Bang, and it's just kind of a background thing on me. When I was a kid, one of my favorite activities was blowing stuff up. Now I was no Bin Laden or anything, but back in those days we had a firecracker. It was about that big around, and it was called a cherry bomb. In the service we called them M80s. It was a pretty powerful firecracker. If you took a cherry bomb and you put it on a Campbell's tomato soup can, you could blow that sucker out of sight. I mean, it was powerful. We used to put them in mud balls. And You know, you light it, you put it in the mud ball, you let the fuse burn down to the edge of the mud ball, then you throw it. And if you did it right, it would blow up in the air and throw mud all over everything. And for some reason, I thought that was the coolest thing. But one day I was out in the garage. We'd just come back from going fishing. We had a bucket of catfish we just cleaned. And I looked out in the backyard, and there's my kid brother, and he's in my stuff. And I told my kid brother, stay out of my stuff. And he's in my stuff. You know, so being a kid, I thought, I'll fix him. I'm going to fix a mud bomb full of fish guts. I'm going to fix him for good. Because we had this whole bucket of fish guts, you know. So there was a bunch of mud out there, and I made this gorgeous mud ball. I filled it full of fish entrails, firecracker in the middle. The plan was to throw the thing out the window so it would blow up right over his head and throw fish guts and mud all over him, and he was going to be mad, and Mother was going to get it all over him, and oh, this was going to be the greatest thing ever going. So I made the mud ball, I put the fish guts in it, I lit the fuse, got the window open there, got the thing in my hand, I'm going to throw it out the window, and the fuse burned down to the edge of the mud ball, and I threw it out the window so it would blow up right over his head. I missed the window. It hit the pane on the side, it flew over my head, and landed in my mother's baby blue Volkswagen convertible. And here is my mother in her favorite car. There was a big bang, followed by a bunch of little bangs on my rear end. And the pattern inside that car looked just like this. So what is the Big Bang? It's a statement of observation. When we measure the temperature of the universe and what it ought to be if something like that happened, it works. When we look at the pattern of stars and the motion of things, it works. The galaxies seem to be moving away in such a way that they came from some incredibly hot primordial source, the Big Bang. Now, let me point something out to you. This has nothing to do with the issue. Someone has said the Big Bang doesn't tell you what banged or who banged it. If you believe in God, this could be a method that God used. Religious people somehow seem to think that this is a huge issue for evolution or something. It has nothing to do with evolution. It has nothing to do with any of the questions that we ask in biology, really, not directly. It's simply a statement of observation. So let's not get sidetracked with issues that are non-issues. And getting upset about the Big Bang or having any kind of feelings that this is somehow an atheist plot or something is simply an irrational approach, an uninformed approach to what the Big Bang concept is about. Okay, we have three galaxies located in positions A, B, and C. Let's go backwards in time. If they're here today, then they were here yesterday. And they were here the day before yesterday. And if you keep going back in time, where would they eventually end up? At a Big Bang. At a singularity. At a beginning. Every scientific study we have supports the concept of the expanding universe. And the expanding universe, in all versions of Big Bang cosmology, suggests there was a point of incredibly high temperatures. There was a point of incredibly high density. There was a beginning. Now, back in the old days, there was another view. It was called the oscillating universe theory. The oscillating universe theory was the idea that this is a cyclic process. At the time Carl Sagan did his program on cosmos, this was the rage, and it was even in our books, in our textbooks that we used in the schools. The idea was that when the Big Bang occurred, the universe expanded. As it expanded, gravity eventually slowed it down. It eventually stopped expanding, and then gravity pulled it back, and it happened all over again. So the idea was that we live in an oscillating universe. A universe that expands and contracts and expands and contracts and expands and contracts forever. The problem with that is that in the early 21st century, we discovered something truly amazing and something that is still being studied, still trying to be understood. Because what has happened is we have found out that the universe is not slowing down. The universe is accelerating. The universe is accelerating. We call it dark energy. We talk about the fact that the universe is being pulled apart. It will eventually simply decay into infinite low density. We don't know what's doing it. We have called it dark energy. The real darkness is our understanding. But my point right here is that the oscillating universe theory is no longer an option. Because the universe is accelerating in its expansion. That acceleration seems to be increasing with time. So it's a one-time event. We had a beginning. Now all I've tried to do here is just to suggest that motions in space suggest a beginning. In our next presentation, we'll look at some other evidences for a beginning and see whether or not there's any indication of cause. Let me say to you again that these presentations are a beginning themselves. What I'm trying to do is to get people to look at evidence. And we know that there are going to be questions, there's going to be discussions. We have a website. You can see the address here. You're welcome to look at some of the explanations that we have explained in greater detail there. You are welcome to contact me by email if you have additional questions. But what I hope you do is to go on to program number 3, in which we'll look at more evidence that there was a beginning and start our discussion of what the cause of that beginning might be.
Okay, while Chris adjusts the camera for us, just some observations and things to think about. In my experiences over the years in talking with different people and about God and about the universe and about the Bible, it's a big subject. It is a really big subject. As he just demonstrated, the cosmos itself is just unfathomable large. It boggles the mind. The mind, for those of us who are bound by pretty much time and space and those types of things, to think about what he just said about how large our universe is, and how grand it is just it is mind-boggling. It astounds us who are limited in our thinking and our ability to comprehend things of that nature that we haven't experienced. But let me say this: because the subject is large, because the subject is complex, there is and there will be the tendency to, when you discuss what we learn here with those who might have opposing opinions, or anything about the Bible, anytime you talk about the Bible and whether or not it is truth, or particular aspects or features of the Bible, or particular points that are made, there is the tendency to divert and go off point, because there is so much there, and there are so many things to talk about. And my suggestion would be to you, and my experience has been, that it is easy to get off track. It is easy for them to say, the other side to say, yeah, but what about this? Well, if you go off on that and handle that, then there might be a diversion from that. What are they called? Rabbit? Chasing rabbits. There are multiple opportunities to never get back to the core of what you're talking about. And so when he talks about this idea of proof about something, or last week he talked about definitions, make sure that when you start talking about something, that you give it a definition that you both can agree upon. Because if I am trying to convince you of something based on my definition of what that is, and it doesn't match what their definition is, we're going to be going along in a parallel universe, so to speak, and never come together. So define points, define words, define concepts early on, and do your best to keep track of where you are in the discussion. And when a diversion happens and you move down that path, say, okay, we're going to go that direction, but I want to come back to this original point and write down what that point was. Because believe me, it's difficult to remember where you were after you've just covered 3 or 4 or 5 other topics. And the older you get, the harder it gets. Let me tell you that. And it's a shame. I hate to say that I can speak from experience on that in my latter years here. So, I would suggest that you take notes. Anytime you're talking about something, take notes. And then when you get to a point of agreement, let's say you're talking about something in the Bible. Let's just say the necessity of baptism, since we talked about that considerably in the study of types. The necessity of baptism for remission of sins and for salvation. Once you get to that point where they say, well, yeah, I see that. I agree. The Bible supports that concept. Then you say, the Bible supports, that baptism is necessary for the forgiveness of sins and thus salvation. And say, that's right, correct? And they say yes, and say, okay, we'll put a check mark by that. We're not going to make them sign their name to it, but a check mark. Because later on, something will come up, more than likely, that is going to flip a switch, and they're going to, in their head, go back to a previous way of thinking. And then what you have here is you lift that up and say, we already decided, based on, do we need to go back over those points again? Oh, no, you're right, I understand. So what I'm saying is, this topic is just unbelievably complex. When you start talking to somebody about the creation of the universe and all that has come from that, he talks later. He'll talk next week. He says about the more about this growing universe, the cosmos, and so forth. Later on down the line, I don't remember what lesson it's in, but he talks about the uniqueness of Earth and the uniqueness of our solar system, and how there is so much that has to work just right. The tilt of the Earth, if it's off by a half a degree or something like that, it doesn't work. Now, I may be exaggerating that, and he'll give you what he really, the truth on that, but just some small little difference. There are, I'm not going to go into that because I can't remember it, and he'll cover that in better detail than I will. But if there's something that doesn't work just right within our solar system, our planets are not aligned just right, it is much easier for Earth to get hit by asteroids and comets and things of that sort. But we're kind of shielded. Now, isn't that an interesting concept? The Earth is shielded from disaster. And people will say, oh, well, that's an amazing coincidence. Well, no. The God of the Bible created all of this, and so as a result, very little is coincidence. It's by design, and he'll talk considerably about design and why our world and every aspect of our world has so much design in it. He talks considerably about the Fibonacci spiral. I'd never heard of that phrase,
Right.
but as most of you have not heard it, but it occurs in our universe and our world, and it explains a bunch of things. Just a little teaser. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking, and Rob Harris is on watching with us, and so he may be able to speak to this better than I can, but I'm guessing that the specificity that our world enjoys is not just for our solar system, not just for our planet. There are 500 billion other galaxies out there. What happens if galaxy triple Z down, 300 billion light years from here?
Right.
What happens if they start moving around? They're out of whack by half a degree. They hit each other, and then that solar system, that universe, that galaxy runs into ours. I mean, so it's not just the specificity. It's not just for Earth. It's not just for the Milky Way galaxy. It's everywhere.
The thing that you will notice right off the bat is that neither Chris nor I are astronomers or scientists or anything. So we're going to be putting things in layman terms and throwing things out that probably a true scientist could say, that's really wrong.
Sure.
And right off the bat. So we're not going to pretend to know. And something like that, could happen without that. And my response to that right there would be, well, that's a good reason why the Big Bang is more of a support for God creating the universe than an opposing point against God creating the universe. Because if it did do what we are observing, and he says you can't argue that there was something that caused something at some point, and that things are moving out. There's no evidence that it contracted, that oscillating universe theory, and then starting over again that time. We don't have any evidence. It's a theory. What we do know and can observe, apparently, is that things are expanding and moving outward. And as you know, if you have a balloon and are blowing the balloon up, if you put a point here on the balloon and a point here on the balloon with an ink pen, as that balloon gets bigger, they're going to get farther apart. And so the chances of a universe spinning out of control and going into another one is probably impossible, because once things get set in motion like this and everything is moving away, they're going to continue to do so. So the universe is going, as large as it is going to continue to expand, and we're going to get farther and farther and farther away from our nearest neighbors. Now,
And it's speeding up too,
and speeding
right?
up, and speeding up. So all of that is interesting. I will mention also, I wish he had left that chart up there of the 4 or 5 words, the Hebrew words that are used, Reshith, Elohim, Bara, and there's another one that starts with Asa. And they are words that he's going to refer to over and over again. And a point that he will make, or was making there, is this idea that, as he made it last week, when you encounter something in the Bible, you have to look at context. You have to look at the words that were used, the original Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New, and see what was meant at that time, best we can determine, what it meant for them to use that word. And he will make distinctions among these things that are closely related to those points that he was making there. So he'll tell us more about that, and will talk to us about the importance of the Hebrew, the exact Hebrew meaning of Hebrew words. Just looking at my notes here to see what other things I had jotted down. He didn't deal with this. He did a little bit last week. Number 2 question on our list says, what do we mean by the word proof? And then his answer is, in these programs we are defining proof as the weight of evidence, not absolute proof. And he contends here that it's pretty difficult to come up with absolute proof of anything. And he also mentioned at the beginning of this session here that he wasn't going to be using the Bible. And I think he said last week that he wasn't going to be using the Bible for the first 4 lessons or so. He's going to be using the Bible because if you're going to talk about how credible the Bible is and how consistent the presentation in the Bible is as we match it against what we know scientifically to be accurate, observable, true evidence in front of us. He's going to have to, and he will. He said in these first 4 lessons, I think he said last week, we're not going to be using the Bible that much. And I'm going to say it again, and he just said it again. When you're talking to someone who does not believe in the Bible, does not believe in a God, any supreme being, that the universe that we have, the world we have, our very existence is all explainable through a series of mutations that occurred somewhere along the line that took millions and millions of years, and he will explain how the theory of evolution couldn't be true given even what they're allowing for all of this to take place. You still, and he comes back to this point, you still have to have something. You have to have a beginning. And this idea of the Big Bang being against God, really there's more evidence for God. You have the size. He talks about the temperature, the pattern, the hot source, and all of that we can observe, or that we have evidence of, that we can look at, which points to a beginning. If you take the alternative view that the universe and all of this has always existed, matter has always existed, he didn't say it, but I would say that's what God claims. In the Bible, God is eternal. He has always existed. He will always exist. And so that's what we're contending about God. Why would you say that it makes sense for matter and the universe to be there and disregard the fact that there, was a God there? The difference is they're saying that it has always existed. We are saying it hasn't always existed. God has, and so he created it at some point. And using the evidence from this notion of the Big Bang is, as he says, more in harmony with Scripture than in opposition.
So Rob chimes in. I'm just going to read you what he says because I'm not sure I understand it yet. He says, think about infinity, which is a difficult concept. Without a start point, you have to believe in negative infinity in regard to time. Clearly impossible because everything that's happened would have already happened. You may have to talk to me more about that, Rob. You may have to explain a little bit more than that.
Okay, that's one of those rabbit runs. No, it isn't, and that's true. That's probably another argument for the fact that there had to be a beginning. And Rob can maybe elaborate on that at some point for us. Where do we want to go with this? The next lesson, I don't remember the name of it, but he will take us and logically walk us through these various steps that he has set up. And as I've said, there are 36 of these lessons. You will run across different versions of these. And if you go to the doesgodexist.com website, and I may have mentioned this last week, the audio versions of these only have 26 lessons, and they are a little bit different than the 36 that he has in the videos. But what he has started with was those 3 tapes that I had, those 3 general lessons that I had 30 or 40, maybe 50 years ago. I don't know how long ago it was. Maybe it was probably about 50 years ago. I think he said he said for something about 40, 50, however long it was. Started from those 3 tapes, and now he has 36 lessons. So he is building on these, and they post things on their website, and so when they move into a new genre like the video rather than the audio, they are expanding and adding new information all the time. So if you try to go back and forth and things are not the same, then that's why. It's interesting. I told Chris today, I said, you might want to copy these four onto your computer and give me back the CD so that I can watch the CD before I come. And he said, yeah, I found them on YouTube, so I can just give you your disc back. And I said, you might look and make sure that they match up. And he said, you're absolutely right. After the second one, they divert. So there are different arrangements. There are different contents among these. And so if you go away from what we're doing and go look at the others, you can do that, and the material is going to be the same. It's just going to be presented in probably different lessons and in different ways. So when I encounter what he talks to us about, it fills me with awe and just total humility that a God that can do that, a God that can create from nothing what he has created, and that it is so wonderful and marvelous and amazing and systematic, and everything works so well. It is very humiliating. There's a tendency to feel really small and insignificant in a study like this. But what is so comforting, on the other hand, is that I have a God who is capable of doing what he did and filling me with awe, and I'm going to use the word fear there, and I'm going to use it in two ways. Respect for him and his authority and his ability and his omnipotence and his ability to do all that, to the point where it drives me to say, I'm going to do everything I can to please that God. I don't want to upset that God. I don't want to do anything that tells him that I don't respect him or his will. And one of the things that when I pray, one of the things that I pray for or say in my prayer, and I do it in every prayer, I thank him for creating us, and I thank him for giving us with such clarity what he wants us to do to please him in his word. And without that, we would be at a loss. We would be at the point where civilizations, I guess, who have developed their own theology would be. We don't have to worry about that. We have enough evidence here that what we have in our hands is what he wants us to have in our hands, and that we are thoroughly equipped for every good work to know how to please him and serve him. And that is an extreme comfort. And back to my original point on that, he knows me. He cares about me. As small and insignificant, as humble as what this kind of study can make you feel, it also has to increase your faith in the fact that he is willing to love us, love me, enough to do what he has done for me in creating all of this world and giving of his son and us His will, and all that He has done for us. It is amazingly humbling for us to think about a cosmos that big, that large, that complex, that uniform, being created by the same God that loves me for who I am and wants me to love Him back.
It's kind of crazy.
It is.
Every time I try to wrap my mind around how big the universe is and how intricately it works and things like that, I'm reminded of God's questions to Job in the last section of his book, and that's his goal with Job is, do you understand, Job, who you are in comparison to who I am? How humble you should be in comparison to me, and you come in and you try to take the universe away from me. You know, it's kind of like I used to have a professor in college who would say, you know, when you get to be God, you can have your own universe, you make your own rules. But until then, you need to abide by God's and obey Him. And you just kind of think about that, as at least that runs through my head every time I try to grab a hold of how big the universe is and all the things that He's done. We still don't even know how many galaxies there are out there. There are lost galaxies in space. You know, we still haven't found the end of it, and it keeps on going, and it's increasing. So we'll never know. And
as Rob says, if it is infinite, then there is no end to it. And there is, that's the suggestion, that it is infinite. And that's a concept that we can't wrap our minds around. When we were studying the comparison between the church and Israel, God's people, in the study of types, I may have mentioned this fact that, you know, when I look back at how God dealt with Israel, dealt with His people, and how consistently rebellious they were. Stiff-necked is a word that I think is maybe only found in the Bible. A stiff-necked and rebellious generation is a phrase that comes up again and again. But they were a people that were prone to forgetting, had very short memories, what God had done for them. And so He would have to remind them in some way. And I think about us as Christians today, and I think, I don't do that. But that's a rather arrogant attitude. I shouldn't do that. I have the benefit of looking back at what they did and how God dealt with them, and how He sent His Son, and how things are different now. We have God's complete revealed Word. We are probably more accountable as a result than they were. True, they had God right there doing things for them, which should have made an impression, a lasting impression, and it didn't. But we have not only that account to read about and believe and to shore up our faith, but we also have the rest of God's Word as well. But that tendency to say, well, I'm not as bad as Israel, you know, and then you read Job.
Yeah.
Job was a devout man. Job was a good man. Job believed in God. Job served God. Job offered sacrifices for his kids in case they didn't do it, in case he hadn't raised them well enough. And throughout all of the testing that Job encountered, and all of the criticism from his supposed friends, it says in the last couple of chapters there, Job didn't sin. In all of this, they sinned. Job didn't sin. But God made the points to Job that Chris just talked about. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Job needed reassurance that God was who He said He was, that He was the creator of the universe, and as little as Job, as came out of Job's mouth that expressed a little bit of doubt, God's relationship with Job was that you need to be reminded of something. And I look at that and I say, maybe we today are Jobs. Maybe we, because of what we have with God's complete revealed word and everything he wants us to know and feel and learn about him, who are we to even question a little? And maybe the standard for us is going to be more the standard for Job than it is or it was for the standard for Israel. So it's important for us to know God's word. The more we know about his word, the more we know about him, the more we can love him, and the more we can conform our lives around his will to please him. We have had some good comments. We had a number of people who didn't tune in at the time that we are presenting this, but you tuned in later and watched that. And we will encourage you to continue to do that. If 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon doesn't fit your schedule, through the miracle of technology, you can watch this over and over and over again, or at any point at your leisure, and we would continue to do that. And let me just say one more thing before we end here. Not being scientists, not being astronomers, not being earth science and biology and physics teachers the way Clayton is. These concepts come and go. They come in our head, they're there, we understand them, and then 2 weeks later we try to share it with somebody and we go, well, I think he said something about. So don't the resources on doesgodexist.com and YouTube, if they're as Chris suggests, they're out there. Go and look at them more than once. I can tell you that I have been in the middle of an argument and I'm getting ready to quote Clayton. I'm saying, what was it exactly he said about that? And I don't think that's my age. I think that's just our tendency. This is new information and we have to hit it over and over again before it becomes part of us so that we can use it. So don't shy away from going back and listening or watching one of these videos or listening to audio tapes more than once. It will take that to get those concepts and those arguments locked in enough so that you can have them when you need them, when you talk to somebody about God and the creation of the world.
So here's one of those numbers that you're going to forget, but you need to hear it anyhow. Rob says that there are 37 trillion cells in our bodies. They think that there are more stars than there are human cells on the whole earth. So there's more stars. Like, how many people are there out there? How many billion of people? Like, I don't even know. But each person has 37 trillion cells in our body, and there are more stars out there than there are cells in the human bodies and the entire planet. It's just phenomenal, right?
Not really that big.
Right?
Yeah.
So like Rick said, we archive these on our Facebook page. If you're looking for them, you can just go down to our playlists tab and you can click on Does God Exist on our playlist. You can find them on YouTube. You can find them on our phone call system. If you don't have technology, you just want to call in, you can do that, 304-278-0763. And you can listen to all this information as well as the 9 previous lessons, including our worship services on Sundays. You can also listen to us on our podcasts. So we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. So find this information there, listen to it, and we hope it blesses you.
Thank you. See you next week.